Thanks to two Africans, we now have the internet. Philip Emeagwali, a Nigerian computer scientist, invented a supercomputer. It was his supercomputer that used 65,000 separate computer processor, which performed 3.1 billion calculations per second in 1989. That feat led to the creation of the internet. The reason why we're able to access the internet is because of an African American who developed a complex code that allows ordinary people to access, surf the web and even use email. He created what we call .com. Thanks to these two African men, we now have the internet. They provided us with the first time in history that we Africans are able to communicate globally, sharing our own narratives. First time in history since the white men invaded Africa. Now, when the white society invaded, enslaved, and colonized Africans, they indoctrinated many mental enslaving lies into the minds of our ancestors in order to prevent dissent from rising amongst them. Those mental enslaving lies were then subsequently passed down to we current Africans. Now, when rationally thinking, one would think that given our history of slavery and the colonization of Africa that fragmented us, that most Africans today globally would now having access to unlimited information and having the ability to communicate with each other, that we would use the internet to recover many of our lost truths that were stripped away from us during slavery and the colonization of Africa. But this isn't the case at all. Most Black people are instead content believing the lies that were brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors. In the era of information, Black mental enslavement is now a choice. The minds of millions of Black people are so colonized that they not only don't have the appetite for Black liberating truth, it's in fact not even on their mental menu. Many Africans are afraid to think for themselves. They're scared to look at facts, so they never have to admit to themselves that they might be wrong. Many are afraid to learn the truth because their identities are now so deeply connected to the indoctrinated lies. For many, those lies have become their norms, and they fight against anyone who tries to free their minds from those deeply indoctrinated white mental enslaving lies. They literally make enemies of those of us who present facts proving that everything we've been taught by the white society are mental enslaving lies. These are those of us that have grown tired of agreeing to believe things that literally insults our own intelligence. The collective mental state of we Africans throughout the diaspora is consistent with the story known as Plato's cave. It's a story taught to the Greeks by Africa's ancient Egyptians. The Greeks plagiarized the story and renamed it Plato's cave. The story of Plato's cave describes a group of people who have lived their entire life chained to the wall of the cave, being fed lies, mental enslaving lies. One day, one of them broke free from the cave and discovered that all that he had been taught while in the cave were all lies, all mentally enslaving lies. He therefore returned to the cave to free the minds of those he left behind. But as he tried to free their minds, they all resisted. They got angry at him because their identities were so deeply attached to those lies. And the more that he tried to free their minds, the angrier they became. So much, in fact, that they threatened him with violence and chased him out of the cave. This story is consistent with what has been done to we Africans by the Europeans. And for many of us, those lies that they've indoctrinated into our minds are so deeply indoctrinated that we fight against our own people who try to free our minds from those lies. Many also rejects all Black liberating truth because of the inherent call for action that comes from accepting the truth. They therefore instead clings to a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome myth that keeps us complacent, stagnant, mentally enslaved, and therefore keep us within the good grace of our enemies. When we do this, we become the wardens of our own prison. Now, some would say, well, what's wrong? People can believe what they want to believe, okay? You see, that's not a luxury that the oppressed have. The oppressed doesn't have that luxury. The oppressed must gain a true and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. We must function based upon what is true in order to liberate ourselves. Because if we're functioning based upon lies, then all remedies and strategies that stems from those attempts to free ourselves will all be flawed. This is why we must get function based on what is true. The white society have pushed the narrative to lie to us that there are many truths and people are able to tell their own truths. But see, they are deceitful and they spread that falsehood. The reality is this: there's only one truth. If you're not functioning based on what is true, you're actually functioning based upon a lie. There are not many truths. There's one truth and everything else are lies. We must function based upon the truth of our plight and condition. We must understand it. Unlike at the end of the Jewish Holocaust, when the UN and America worked together to rebuild their lives, those white nations that brutally exploited Africans for centuries did not do the same for us. They instead socialized us. Socialized is when the oppressors exploit their monopoly over information that's fed into the mind of the subordinate population. They socialize us to think and behave in ways that support the white society. And to keep our collective aggressions from growing towards them, they've shifted our collective aggressions away from themselves and redirected towards ourselves. This is why many of us are self-loathing, perceive ourselves as our worst enemies, and revere the Caucasians. They brainwash us beginning during our early education development by denying us racially affirming education. What this does, this psychology conditions us to accept our subordinate status within the white dominant society. And then they continually inundate us with fraudulent, negative, demoralizing information about ourselves. Doing so demoralizes us, divides us, creates self-loathing, shifts our aggressions against ourselves. It also attacks the core foundation with bondage as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. There's nothing normal about us walking around speaking negatively of ourselves, putting down ourselves. There's nothing normal about us revering our enemies. There's nothing normal about any of this. It's all a result of the white society's monopoly over information that is fed into our minds. They control the media images we see. There are 4 ways to manipulate the human mind: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through repetition. The white society exploits its monopoly over the education we're taught, the media images we see, the societal narrative we hear, and through repetition to manipulate us to think in ways that prevent us from ever liberating ourselves. We must recognize the truth. Some of us are programmed to just use the internet to twerk, do jokes, and we don't care about liberation because they condition millions of us to no longer seek liberation, but to merely only yearn for a comfortable footing within the system of white supremacy. It's always by deliberate design when the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to think. We have been socialized by the white society. It is our reality. One love and peace. It's time to wake up.